Hello, this is Roy Silva, and this is part two of the lesson for March 20th through 26th. The first part of the lesson is called Master, the Tempest is Raging. And this shorter second part will cover the rest of today's lesson, which focuses on Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus teaches in parables. And so uh, we looking at Matthew 13, he's teaching at by the seaside, and great multitudes were gathered together unto him, so that he went into a ship and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. And this isn't the first time that he has done this. Um, and he spake many things unto them in parables. And then we have the parable of the sower. Now, we all know the parable of the sower. I'm actually not going to go through it verse by verse, except to say that the parable is about a sower who goes out to plant grain, and it's the same seed. He throws the all of the seed is in one bag, and he scatters it out on the ground, on the tilled ground. And so there's only a single type of seed, but the seeds fare very differently. Only some of them actually take root and grow to maturity and uh, bear grain. So the the lesson is, as Elder Talmage has said in Jesus the Christ, the parable, instead of being called the parable of the sower, it might be more uh, accurately called the parable of the different kinds of soil, because what makes the difference in whether the grain, the barley, the wheat, whatever it is, uh, actually takes root and grows up is where the individual seeds fall. And so there are these different types or categories of earth that the different grains, the different seeds happen to fall on. So um, some fall along the side of the path, not on the tilled earth. Some happens to fall in stony places. Some happens to fall among thorns, and then some falls on the good tilled earth, where there's no obstruction, there's nothing else crowding it out for sunlight and water, and it brings forth in verse 8 fruit, some an hundredfold, some, in other words, 100 times the seed, 60-fold, 30-fold. And it's interesting because the disciples don't immediately, when they're alone with him, say, "Hey, what does that mean?" They take issue with the whole approach of teaching in parables, and I can almost hear this tone of annoyance. Maybe I'm misreading this in the question in verse 10. Why speakest thou unto them in parables? Like, just say what you mean. Why are you making this difficult, right? And he answers and says unto them, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. And then he explains the reason. And Joseph Smith has altered this verse 12 to read as follows: For whosoever receiveth, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever continueth not to receive, from him shall be taken away even that which he hath. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because, and then he quotes Isaiah, they seeing, see not, hearing, they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, by hearing ye shall hear and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For verily I say unto you that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear, and have not heard them. So let's back up here a little bit. And in verse 11, he says that to the disciples is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom. And as we talked about before, the word mystery to us has this commonly understood meaning of something that requires putting pieces together and figuring out that it doesn't make sense initially, and so we have to get to the bottom of the situation and do work, right? And so in that sense, the common meaning of mystery has some application, but as Paul says later in the New Testament, a mystery, as used in the scriptures, denotes something that can only be known through revelation. It can't be figured out like Hercule Poirot or Endeavor. It can't be figured out through just logic and induction and observation. You can have the smartest person in the world, the person who knows the scriptures the best, and if they do not have the Spirit to reveal and open to their understanding the meaning, then it doesn't matter. So that is the scriptural meaning of the word mystery. And it's interesting that Jesus emphasizes that the process of having the needed revelation depends on your desires, right? The people who don't understand are people who have shut their eyes and closed their ears, lest they should actually perceive and understand. And that word "lest" is interesting because it's like it suggests that they've done it in order to avoid, right? They don't want really deeply to understand. They don't want to know, right? And so to those people, Jesus is going to speak in a parable form so that they will have to work for the knowledge, right? And it's interesting that the thing in this instance, there are instances where I think spiritual truths of salvation are being taught, or maybe there is some kind of specialized reproof or instruction intended for that individual that's being given in parable. Uh, we think of uh, uh, Nathan coming to David after he has slept with Bathsheba and murdered Uriah. And Nathan doesn't accuse David and say, "What hast thou done?" He tells him a parable of a man who just has this little lamb, and how his rich neighbor who has hundreds of sheep has a visitor, and instead of killing one of his sheep to make a feast for the visitor, he takes the poor man's little lamb. And David's wrath is kindled, and he says, "Who is the man? For he shall surely die." And Nathan responds, "Thou art the man." David could not have heard that if it had not been communicated to him in a third person way, right? Externally, so that David did not shut down in defensiveness, in anger, right? As long as it was about someone else, David was able to exercise righteous judgment and see the situation as it really was. And Jesus did that many times with the Pharisees. Instead of attacking them directly, he would say a certain man had two sons, and he would tell a parable. And so parables have many uses. And here it's kind of interesting to me because as we are about to see, the meaning of this parable is not really necessarily a doctrine of salvation. It's not some kind of critical thing that we need to understand about Jesus or about the atonement. It's simply a parable, I think, maybe most easily categorized as a parable about missionary work. And it would be appropriate for those disciples because he had sent them just in the previous chapters out to preach. And they had been alone and they had met with all kinds of responses, right? They'd been shut down, they had been rejected, they had been received by some. They had been treated with respect and gratitude in some instances. And it wasn't because their message varied from one person to another, and that was the reason for the different responses. It's because of the different types of people and hearts that they encountered. And so Jesus was teaching them and I guess the multitude at large to maybe as an incentive that if they understood the parable to look inside and make sure that their hearts were the good soil that where the word could take root. So Jesus explains it to them in verses, we're in Matthew 13, verses 19. And when we get to he talks about the different types of soil and turning to verse 22, he says, he that received seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. In other words, the distractions, the worries of making a living, of worldly things, status, power, position, take the person's attention and emotions, and because the person has given their heart to those things, it's like weeds and thorns that crowd in and take all the sunshine and all the moisture, so that the word, the testimony of that person, that is choked, it's crowded out. And then in verse 23, but he that receiveth seed into the good ground, or with a good heart, is he that heareth the word. And Joseph Smith adds, instead of just saying and understandeth it, he that heareth the word and understandeth and endureth. Isn't that interesting? Because even when we receive the word in an honest heart and we keep the weeds away and try to pull out the stones and anything that might interfere, there are external circumstances that we are not in control of, right? That always happen with weather. There's heat, there's frost. And so Jesus talks about enduring, right? Even when there's no moisture, even when the sun is beating down on the plant and would otherwise wither it if its roots had not sunk, the seed, the testimony of that person had not sunk deep into their hearts, right? So that one word that Joseph Smith has added is so significant. So reading that verse with verse 23 with that change, it says, but he that received seed into the good ground is he that heareth the word and understandeth and endureth, right? Which also endureth to the point where it beareth fruit and bringeth forth. So that's the parable of the sower. Now, the next one is related, and I find it very interesting because in these next or in this parable and a related one that starts in verse 47, the parable of the net, Jesus is talking about his return, his second coming. And I think that's interesting because obviously none of the disciples were going to see that. We're talking thousands of years into the future, and I think it's interesting that Jesus wanted them to understand the big picture, to understand that the kind of conditions of rejection and of hardship, of fatigue, of rejection, of disrespect, that these are all temporary, and that there was another part of his ministry that was going to happen, and he wanted to enlarge their perspective and broaden the window of their minds. So another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. And while men slept, his enemy, Satan, came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. And when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst thou not sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? Why are there thorns and weeds growing up? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up, pull up the tares? But the householder says, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together. Now, this is important because in the King James Version of the Bible, it switches the order. It says, first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. But Joseph Smith changes it and says, first the wheat into my barn, and the tares are bound in bundles to be burned. So what does that mean? So the gospel is preached, and the the saints live among the worldly, and and the wicked ripen in wickedness as the saints, maybe because of the opposition and the circumstances in which they live, they ripen perhaps more quickly in their faith and their reliance on Jesus, and are given opportunities to endure. And so it's interesting that the faithful are gathered to a specific spot, which of course we know right before the second coming is going to happen, that the world will become so wicked and God will be prepared to pour out great destructions among the wicked, that at that point, when he's going to set fire to the field, right, so that everything in it burns down, he first carefully has the wheat gathered out and safely stored into his barn, right? So in verse 36, then Jesus sent the multitudes away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. In other words, explain. And he answered and said unto them, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. It's me. It's my gospel. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, the saints. And the tares are the children of the wicked one, the followers of Satan, just often just called the worldly or the world. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. And here we have another extended change by Joseph Smith. And as usual, it contains a lot of important new information. So if you turn, this is the appendix. It's too long to be at the bottom of the page. So this is Matthew 13:39 through 44. The harvest is the end of the world or the destruction of the wicked. The reapers are the angels or the messengers sent of heaven. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world, Joseph Smith adds, or the destruction of the wicked. And then this next verse is all new. For in that day before the Son of Man shall come, he shall send forth his angels and messengers of heaven, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them out among the wicked, and there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth, for the world shall be burned with fire. So this kind of changes or adds a different adds a back end to the parable, because in the parable the wheat is just gathered together and put in the barn, and the tares are left in the field, and they're gathered together and burned. But there's a detail here, if you've noticed, that even after the wheat has been gathered into the barn, inevitably there are still some stray tares that have been just caught up and included with the wheat. So even after the saints are gathered right before the second coming, there will be some who are whose hearts are not right, and who in their hearts identify with the world and worldly values and worldly things. And the way that God is going to deal with that in verse 43 is he shall gather out of his kingdom. So these bundles of wheat that have already been prepared and put in the barn in the safe place, he shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them out among the wicked, and there shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth by those people, for the world shall be burned with fire. So before we go into the closely related parable of the net, I thought it would be helpful to turn to modern revelation, and specifically section 45 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which talks in kind of more detail about these two concepts, the concepts of the gathering and the concept of the burning of the wicked. So in section 45, and I'm just looking here to see, it was given in March of 1831. So more than 190 years ago in our same month, March. And he says in verse 69, and there shall be gathered. Well, actually, let's start a little bit before. He talks about the gathering to the new Jerusalem. And so that's the equivalent of the barn in the parable in Matthew 13. And it shall be called the New Jerusalem, a land of peace, a city of refuge, a place of safety for the saints of the Most High God. And the glory of the Lord shall be there, and the terror of the Lord also shall be there, insomuch that the wicked will not come unto it, and it shall be called Zion. And it shall come to pass among the wicked that every man that will not take his sword against his neighbor must needs flee unto Zion for safety. So even those who have not initially joined the church and heard the gospel, the wickedness and violence of the world will become so intolerable that they'll have to make a choice. And they will, some of them belatedly make that choice and join the saints. And it says in verse 71, and it shall come to pass that the righteous shall be gathered out from among all nations and shall come to Zion singing with songs of everlasting joy. So that's the barn, right? But we know that even then, just as in the early days of the church, in Kirkland, in Independence, in Nauvoo, there were some who gathered with the saints who had ulterior motives and whose hearts were not right, and who engaged in rebellion and iniquity and fraud and all kinds of things against the saints. And at the last day, even after the saints have been gathered, there will still be some of those people. And so what Jesus is saying is that he will send forth messengers before his actual coming, and those messengers will take out those people and cast them out into the world. And then section 45 of the Doctrine and Covenants, he talks about what happens next. Verse 47, then shall the arm of the Lord fall upon the nations, and then shall the Lord set his foot upon this mount, the Mount of Olives, and it shall cleave in twain, and the earth shall tremble and reel to and forth, and the heavens also shall shake. And the Lord shall utter his voice, and all the ends of the earth shall hear it, and the nations of the earth shall mourn, and they that have laughed shall see their folly, and calamity shall cover the mocker, and the scorner shall be consumed. And listen to this, they that have watched for iniquity shall be hewn down and cast into the fire. So that is the second coming, that the rest of the world, that is not the physical place where the saints are gathered in Zion, will have tremendous destructions poured out. There will be diseases, there will be war. It sounds from Revelation that an asteroid may strike the earth and kill a third of the people and destroy a third of the sources of water, affect a third of the ocean and the landmass. I mean, there will be horrible things that happen among the wicked, and Jesus will finish it off when he comes. And so we have that, and then closely related to this parable of the wheat and the tares, starting in verse 47, he says, again, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which when it was full, they drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So shall it be at the end of the world. And once again, Joseph Smith has added the sentence so that we understand, and the world is the children of the wicked. It's the worldly, right? And once again, he emphasizes exactly what he has already said once. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just. Okay, so this is now the second time in a parallel paragraph that he has taught this doctrine, which I don't think is taught anywhere else in the scriptures. And in verse 50, he says, and shall cast them out into the world to be burned. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So then I'm just looking. That is the end of the parable. But one thing that we didn't complete, right? Because we've talked about the wicked and what happens to them. But at the second coming, what's going to happen to the righteous? They are the righteous who have died are going to be resurrected into the celestial kingdom. And so in verse 43, going back to the parable of the wheat and the tares, it ends with this verse: then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun. Clearly a reference to the glory of the sun, the celestial kingdom, in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And so by these parables, I think Jesus is enlarging the field of vision of the disciples and helping them to understand that his ministry, which is going to end not too far in the future on the cross, uh, and then with resurrection, that is not the end. That a glorious and very different part of his ministry is yet to come. And so that is Matthew 13. And that is the second part of our lesson today. So I would just like to end by bearing you my testimony that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is the Jehovah of the Old Testament, that I am so grateful for the opportunity that we have in these precious words to 2,000 years later see his character in the way he interacted with his disciples, with the people who came to him for help, with those who were struggling, to have faith, and also with those whose hearts were hard and who opposed him. And his courage and his majesty in the face of opposition. What a wonderful blessing we have to come to know the Savior through these precious scriptures. I bear you my testimony that they are true. And I also bear you my testimony that as we spend time studying them, that the Holy Ghost will open the mysteries of God to our minds and to our hearts. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.